The scene that I'd been to Italy several times. My companions, they on the other hand, as soon as we walked out of the mission office, like I remember the last time I trained, my last transfer, I have her bags. I'm like, hey, we have an appointment. We need to go. And so we're walking quickly down the street, ready to get onto a bus. And all of a sudden, I have the impression, like, stop and look at your companion. So I stopped and I looked back at her, and she was like 100 yards back. She hadn't been able to move, and she just had her suitcases, and she was just looking around in shock. And I realized, like, okay, Narina, you're used to this, but your companion is from a small little city in Oklahoma, and she has never been to a big city like this. The things that most shock missionaries would be the small cars. Hundreds of motorcycles and scooters zooming around the city, the ancient buildings, small roads, and probably the amount of people on the streets. Like, especially coming from Utah, a lot of people stay indoors, but in Italy, they stay outdoors. Yeah. It's a very big, crowded city. It takes a long time to get from point A to point B unless you're on foot. So there are 5 zones in the Rome area. In Rome, there are 5 zones, and each zone covers a different part. Rome 1, let's say it covers St. Peter's and that area right there, so you stay in the city. But Rome 2 covers the mission home area, but also a couple of areas that would take like an hour or 2 on bus to get out. So it really depends on the area in Rome where you serve. There are a lot of small towns, mainly in Sicily, I would say. I served in Mistretta, which is north of Sicily, near the mainland Italy. 4,000 people on a hilltop, and everyone has a Book of Mormon. Everyone has had missionaries enter their house. But yeah, there are some cities that you can walk across the city in 10 minutes and everyone knows who you are. So it really, you go from huge cities to small cities where everyone knows your name. Outside of Rome, rolling hills, vineyards, pastures. Once you get inside Rome, you don't see a spot of grass. There are a lot of trees, but downtown Rome, it's building and road. Outside of Rome is like a rolling hillside, but then you go south to Naples, and there's beautiful mountains along the coast. You go to Sicily, and it feels like you're in the middle of the Lord of the Rings. You find everything in the Rome mission. You find everything. It's beautiful. They do a really good job at preserving the old feeling. You feel like you're in an ancient city. There are new cars, and you see people with new gadgets and everything, but it's interesting. It feels like 2 worlds mixed into one. The people are new and their life is new, but they're living in a very old city. My first story was the first hour that I got into the mission. I arrived at the airport alone because I didn't have a companion, and the mission president was there to pick me up. And so when you first arrive in the Rome mission, either the mission president or the assistants will pick you up, and then they'll take you on a tour. You can either go to the Colosseum or to St. Peter's or to the Roman Forum, and then you can get a pizza or an ice cream, and then you head to the mission office and then get the business aspect of the mission resolved. But I can't even remember what it's called, but it was somewhere where Paul taught. And I got my camera from the car, took a couple of pictures, and then we went back to the car and my stuff was gone. And I asked Sister Acerson, did President Acerson move my bags? And she looked back and she was like, President! And he came, and the car had been broken into, and the only stuff I had was my camera and the clothes on my back. So for a split second, I thought, I'm starting my mission with nothing. And then a split second later, I thought back to the MTC and a talk that I'd heard about the pre-existence. And I knew that this either wouldn't have happened if God didn't think that I could still be a successful missionary, or this, like, if this would affect my mission, then God is going to put things in my path to still help me be a tool in his hands. And miracles happened. That evening, some man was walking his dog in a park and he came across my passport, and he called his friend and he said, I just found this American passport. I don't know what to do with it. And his friend came, and in the back of your passport, there'll be stapled a ministerial certificate. And at the bottom, it'll say the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he said, I recognize that name because I took English classes years ago from young men in this church. So he had the assistant's number saved in his phone, and he called the assistant and said, I found a passport. And at this point, the assistant knew that the new sister had lost her bags. So I got my passport back, and that was the one thing I needed to stay in the country. And everything worked out from there. And it was a testimony to me that God knows his missionaries, and he knows what they need to be successful. And if you don't have something, you'll either be fine without it, or God will provide a way. So to just trust in him. And that really helped me throughout my mission, looking back on that God was in the details the whole time. Generally, what would be rude in America would be rude in Italy. But one thing that I've noticed that Americans do a lot that Italians do not is waste food. Italians do not waste food. And when Italians love someone, they show their love through their food, through feeding that person. So one suggestion I would have for someone serving in Italy would be to eat everything. In the White Handbook, it does mention, be aware of how much food there is and how many it's supposed to feed. But when they put food on your plate, even if you don't think you can get through it, say a prayer and get through it, and you'll have the love of that person. Italians generally, in Rome, I wouldn't have any qualms accepting a dinner invitation. In Sicily, in the little hilltop city that I served in, they would put in like their weekly earnings to feed to feed the missionaries, because they wanted to make a good impression. So yes, in Sicily, generally the more south you go, the poorer the people are. Naples area and further down, the more poor they are. But in Rome, I wouldn't be too worried about the family suffering because you have eaten at their house. I want to say Italians are a little bit more lazy. Their customer service is horrible. Like if you went to the store and you're checking out and they get a phone call from their friend, they'll take the phone call over checking you out. Like Americans are all about efficiency and getting the customer out. But Italians are very personable and relaxed. And so that is one big difference. They sleep in, then they go to work, and then they have a lunch break that all the stores close in Rome or in Italy. All the stores close around 1 till at least 3 or maybe 4. 1 to 4 in Sicily, maybe 1 to 3 in Rome. And the city is empty. Everyone goes home, eats a big plate of pasta, and goes to take a nap. So missionaries don't have much work at that point, and that is why they're encouraged to do their language study at that hour and to have their own lunch or to do their own additional studies during that time. But it's not the most effective finding time because the Italians are taking their rest. So at 10 o'clock is when you leave the apartment and you don't return. You can return for lunch. I found that returning for lunch takes a big part of your day out because of, like I said, in Rome, from point A to point B, it takes a long time. So we would pack our lunch, some fruit, some vegetables, some crackers, and we would stay out during lunch, find a park, do our language study outside, and then keep working. And at 9 o'clock, we would return home that night. In Rome, we would be lucky to have 1 meal appointment a week. But in Sicily, we didn't have to do shopping because there was always food being dropped off by members. Rome just became two stakes. It is definitely growing, and there's the temple being built there. And ever since the temple was announced, there's a different spirit in the land. It's really incredible to see how the members have stepped up to show their gratitude for a temple coming, and they've become more involved and willing to be assistants to the missionaries and helping in whatever way they can to find people who are searching for the truth. The church amount of members depends on the city. Rome, there are wards, and then when you leave Rome and go to Naples and in Sicily or Sardinia, there are a lot of more branches than wards. Some branches will consist of 10 people, 6 people, and then you go to like Rome 2 where there's 200 at least. So it really depends. I would say Rome is the strength of where the members are. In Rome, they have good priesthood leadership. They have a good number of priesthood holders, but that dwindles as you go onto the islands. A lot of missionaries, a lot of elders can expect to serve as either a branch president or a counselor in some of the smaller branches on their missions. The sisters, they help the ward mission leader. If there is not, if it's a city where there are no elders, then the sisters become very involved in helping the branch president with the work. But generally, if there are elders, then the elders will take it upon themselves to delegate what needs to be done. The sisters, in that case, just do their missionary work. I would say every missionary should always be prepared to be called upon to give a talk. Most of the members in Italy used to be Catholic. And so they're just coming from that background to becoming a Latter-day Saint. So all of their friends and sometimes all of their family members are still Catholic. So there's a lot of understanding between the two different religions. I found that I never felt threatened or disrespected by a Catholic for their beliefs. I always, in teaching, I found that it was easier to teach to that person's understanding when I taught first, when I first found our commonalities. So one thing I would suggest to missionaries would be, when you're teaching someone, to keep in mind, what does this person who comes from a Catholic background believe about God or about the atonement? They have different beliefs. Even they do believe in God, but they see him differently. We see him as someone that we can approach in prayer, and someone who will really respond to us and who has one-on-one time with us. Catholics don't see that. They pray through saints because God is too great to approach one-on-one. So coming with that understanding of how they perceive God and principles of the gospel that we do have in common, it's easier to understand why they believe what they believe and why they do what they do, when you keep that in mind. So teaching at the MTC, a lot of missionaries will come in and say, when I got my mission call, people were like, oh, that's going to be a hard mission. And it's always confused me, because serving in Italy, you see baptisms. I have a huge testimony of what an effect your attitude is, and how your attitude about it affects the success you'll see as a missionary. It was interesting that when I was in Italy, there was the Rome mission and the Catania mission, and a couple months into my mission, the boundaries changed. And the Rome mission, we were a baptizing mission. And when the boundaries changed, our mission president decided to send half of us down to Catania and half of the Catania missionaries up to Rome. And when I got to Catania, I was shocked to hear that most of my companions, from the Catania mission hadn't seen a single baptism. And I asked, and they said, we're here to strengthen the members. And in the Rome mission, we were here to baptize. So it was all just how we perceived what our purpose was. Mm-hmm. And with the mixture of the missionaries, both missions, the one mission became a baptizing mission because it was all our attitude. And missionaries are called to baptize, and with that attitude, you will baptize. There are lots of Catholics. Yes, it is the Catholic capital of the world, but there are so many humble people who are honestly seeking for the truth. And God loves Italians just as much as he loves anyone else, and he really, this is his work, and he will direct obedient missionaries who are seeking to follow Spirit to those who are seeking to find the truth. Italians love food. Most missionaries love food. Italians love feeding people. Missionaries going into Italy would probably already know pasta is a big thing. Pizza is a big thing. The Italians, their staple is pasta. Every lunch, you can count on there being pasta. Every dinner, you can count on there being pasta. They have, the thing in Italy that is different is that Italians don't mix their food. Americans, we put different kinds of food on one plate and we just pick and choose and eat. Italians think that's disgusting. They will eat salad and an appetizer and then pasta and then meat and then dessert, but nothing together. In Italy, though, it's a beautiful mission because you teach people from so many different places. There are so many people from South America, and you'll get a lot of Peruvian food and Ecuadorian food, Bolivian food, and then you'll get Africans, and you try their different cuisine, and then you have Filipinos, and you have a lot of rice and steamed seafood and vegetables. So you're going to get a variety of things when you serve in Italy, but the food generally is just so good. Yeah, so good. You can't complain. It's so good in Italy. The food is very different, though, from in America. Like, the snacks, the salty snacks and the candy that Americans are used to, probably you're not going to find in Italy. They have their own kind that's really good, but peanut butter, like Butterfinger, doesn't exist. Reese's Pieces doesn't exist. Nerds or Runs, like things that we find normal, Wheat Thins or Lay's. Italians have their own kind of chips. Italians have their own kind of candy, which is all good, but that's when packages are welcome. And it's funny because I had an Italian companion and I told her about Olive Garden and the breadsticks. She was like, what are breadsticks? We don't have breadsticks. And it's true, Italians don't eat breadsticks. That's an American thing. It's different. It's not as different as Panda Express's to Chinese food, opposite sides of the spectrum. But I mean, there's so many different ways that you can prepare pasta that you could find something close to what you're eating here, there. I'd have to say, though, it's always better because it's homemade. Yeah. Like Alfredo that's not an Italian thing. It's just an American thing, but I mean, in Italy, they make pasta with some kind of white sauce, but it's not Alfredo, so.
That's my favorite.
For missionaries learning Italian, they need to keep in mind there's always a harder language. If you feel like Italian is hard, then look at some Russian or look at a different language, and then you'll be very grateful that you've been called to Italy. Italian is beautiful not only in what it sounds like, but you pronounce everything. Everything you see written, you pronounce. So it's not like French, the secret language that you skip this, but you don't skip this. Everything in Italian is pronounced, and there are a lot of rules to the language that you can, when you learn, you know, it's not guesswork. It's not guesswork. So Italian is, if you have to learn a language, Italian is a very good one to learn. So a lot of new missionaries, so in past tense, Italian has basically three main types of verbs, and there are ERE, IRE, and ARE verbs, and in the past tense they follow this pattern. And IRE verbs in the past tense change to ITO. And to suffer is soffrire, and so automatically they would think soffrire, past tense, soffrito. So when they say Jesus Christ suffered for our sins, they'll say Gesù Cristo ha soffrito per I nostri peccati, which means Jesus Christ deep fried for our sins. So to suffer in the past tense follows a different, unique pattern, but a lot of missionaries learn it the hard way to say that correctly. So sometimes that has raised some eyebrows. Usually the companion speaks better than whoever makes that mistake, so they'll correct and then get a few laughs. But yeah. In Rome, write emails quickly because there's so much to see, you do not have to be in that area to visit that area for P-Day. If it's in a different city, then you'll need the permission of your mission president to travel to that city. But if I was serving in Rome 2 and I wanted to see the Sistine Chapel, which is in Rome 1, then just take the bus there and be aware that there are lots of tourists and lines. But if you're serving there during off season, which would be anytime but summer, then you have a great opportunity to go into the Sistine Chapel and go up the dome of St. Peter's. The Pope comes out in his little piazza every Wednesday morning. There's a bone museum. It's just 3 rooms long, but everything is made out of bones. And then in every city, I would say speak with the locals. In every city there is something to see, and that's the incredible thing, is because Italy is so old that you'll find something that blows your mind. Even just in the city that you're serving, you don't have to go anywhere to find something. Just look around you. And I would have to say I'm not much of an artsy person, and my companions, they were all American, so each one wanted to go through their own set of, I need to see the big things to see in Italy. And so I went to the Sistine Chapel many times, but the statue of David in Florence was the most impressive piece of art that I have probably ever seen in my life. So if you were to serve in northern Italy, Florence would be the place to go to see art. For those serving in northern Italy, I was most shocked by how many dogs there were in Venice. And in Florence, there's a lot of cats, but Rome is definitely a city of cats. It's incredible. You'll be walking somewhere and then you come across this gated area and you look down and there's ruins, and it's a cat park. It's a cat haven, and there'll be signs saying there will be punishment for someone harming a cat. But just walking along the streets, you'll find scooters and cars parked with cans and bowls, specifically from people who live there, leaving food out for the stray cats. Cats are very loved. In Sicily, cats are the normal roadkill. There's not much wildlife that would make mention of. They do have boars. But you only see them late at night when you're driving, and missionaries probably wouldn't be doing that, so they can find boar on their pizza if they wanted that kind of pizza. But that is a meat that is normal to have. Yeah. Wildlife just consists of mainly cats and dogs. In the Rome mission, it is very humid. So in the summer, it feels hotter than hot. And in the winter, it feels colder than cold. I would say it's a lot like Utah. Not in the sense, as hot as it gets, it's that and then more wet. Humidity. Yeah. But it gets cold like Utah. It does not snow like Utah. Rome gets snow maybe once every 10 years. And when there's a couple snowflakes, things close and people go crazy. But in the city I served in Sicily, it actually snowed. But we were in on top of a mountain. So it's like Utah, but more to the bone in that sense. Cold is more to the bone, hot, but you're hot and sweaty. For elders, their only hope is short sleeve shirts for the summertime. They'll definitely use long sleeve shirts, fall and winter. For sisters, especially during the summer, like button up shirts where they don't need an undershirt, because they're already wearing one layer and then they have their shirt on top. Shirts that do not call for an undershirt for modesty, I would go for those shirts. Layers. Cardigans are wonderful because, like anywhere, in the morning it's colder, in the evening it's colder, but during the day you can take off your cardigan, your sweater, put it into your bag. Scarves saved my life as a missionary. Scarves can be used around your neck or around as a sweater in itself. And elders will come to learn to use scarves themselves, even though they may think it's strange in America. In Italy, it's completely acceptable. Tights are really layering up, not just your normal outfit and then a coat, but to layer up is what I would suggest. Elders take vests, or elders take sweaters to put underneath their coats, and socks that they can layer. For elders, they don't have anything to worry about. Yeah, you might come across once in a while, like in America you would, someone who wants to bother you. For sisters, to be honest, you'll get some rude and vulgar comments. Being on a bus alone with your companion, the bus driver might start talking to you, and a couple times my companion and I had to get off and just walk because we didn't want to be alone with the bus driver. The Italian men will always say, "Hi, beautiful, ciao, bella," and it's just their culture, like to not be creeped out by that or weirded out by that. It's just completely normal for Italians to compliment you and to call you beautiful. There are a lot of immigrants from Romania or from Moldova, Ukraine, and those men, from my experience, tended to be more of the type who weren't so innocent in their comments. Stick with your companion and following the Spirit. The Spirit is your best protection. We were warned we were really protected when we were being followed. Sometimes we'd get off the train and always be aware of your surroundings. Look around when you're on the train, and then if you see the same people a couple blocks down the street, you might ask yourself, are they following me? And then a couple blocks down, like, just keep an eye on them. And a couple times my companion and I would get off the train and we would realize we were being followed, and we'd just go over to a park or to some people and start talking with them. And in one case, we used it as a finding opportunity and said, "Hey, like, we think we're being followed. Can we talk to you?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure." So they accepted us into their little huddle, and we started talking with them, and they're like, tell us who it is and we'll help you. And so they kept us around talking to them until the men left, and then we were able to return to our apartment. So nothing scary like our apartment being broken into or knives being pulled on us, but just maybe some guys who think that they can get away with some comments, and so just ignore them and walk away. It's your best option, but really the Spirit is what you want to have with you. So I was a year into the mission, and I was serving in Sicily, in Mistretta, this little hilltop city, and I was training a greenie, and she was tall, blonde, stuck out like a sore thumb. And so Mistretta is a self-sufficient city. They eat what they can grow. But a couple times a week, a truck will come in with fruits and vegetables, and he has a microphone or a megaphone attached to his car where he'll announce his produce, and so people are aware that he's there, and then they'll come bustling out and do their shopping. So Olsen and I went to this hill outside of our house to buy some apples, and we asked him, "Have you ever seen people like us with these tags?" And he said, no, I haven't. So we introduced ourselves, and we learned his name was Vincenzo, and we were being interrupted because customers were coming up. But in the times that he didn't have anyone, we continued speaking with him. And we pulled out the restoration pamphlet. And in the very back, there's a pattern of how we pray. And it's all listed out. And we asked him, can you read this? This teaches how to pray. Can you read it? And he said, I'm sorry, I can't read. Which is pretty common in the smaller cities in Sicily, that they're illiterate. So we told, no problem, Vincenzo. Can you memorize a simple prayer? Vincenzo, what are you grateful for? He said, for my family. And so we said, okay, Vincenzo, this is how you pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for my family. Now, Vincenzo, what do you need help with? He said, I'd like help with my work, that I can be successful. Okay, help with work. And we closed in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. He was like, okay, that's pretty simple. So I said, can you say the prayer now as we close? And he's like, no, maybe next time. I'm like, okay, Vincenzo, next time. So we bought apples from him and we started down the hill towards our house. And a couple minutes into walking, we heard this voice from heaven saying, Caro Padre Celeste, which is Dear Heavenly Father. And we just stopped in our tracks. And I looked at my companion and she looked at me. And for a split second we were confused. And then we heard, Grazie per la mia famiglia. Thank you for my family. And we turned and we saw Vincenzo, who had closed up his truck, and through his megaphone, he was saying the prayer that we had taught him. And right when he finished, he said, Nel nome di Gesù Cristo, Amen. He was passing us and he looked out this window and put his thumbs up as if to ask, was that all right? Did I do it okay? And I just remember thinking how grateful I was for the mission. Only in the mission field would you have experiences like that where you can witness someone saying their first prayer in their lifetime, or seeing someone go to church, or seeing someone open the Book of Mormon and find an answer to their prayers. Only as a missionary. And I was so grateful that God would be willing to let us be a part of that experience in his life. If I could give any advice to a missionary, it would be to trust God. He knows you so much better than you know yourself. And he knows what it would take to lead you to your promised land of happiness. And yeah, like in ether, the winds will blow, but the winds were necessary to push the boat to the promised land. And I think every missionary, when they decide to go on a mission, the opposition mounts. Sisters will find the man of their dreams, and maybe some elders will not want to put school off, or have talents or hobbies that they don't want to put off. But God really does know the details of our lives. And looking back, I can't believe I ever hesitated to go on a mission, because the mission was not only, up till now, the mission was the best 2 years of my life and the best 2 years for my life. And like Elder Holland said, there's not a day that goes by that I do not thank him for the experiences and for the people that I met as a missionary in Italy. Remember what it means to be a successful missionary. And it does not reflect on the number of baptisms. Be obedient. Be obedient. You have such little control as a missionary. People can cancel on you, or a bus might not show up. There are a lot of things you can't control as a missionary, but be obedient in the things that you can control. Be out of bed at 6:30. Make sure the lights are off at 10:30. Get out of the house at 10. Start working. In the little things, they may seem little, but I know that it's in the little things that show God you're really serious about this. And you only have 18 months or 2 years to really give your whole self to the Lord. And that time is so precious and it passes by so quickly that I would say, even if you're soaking wet or being chased by a dog or being rejected, at least then you can relate a little bit to what it must have been like to be to be Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I know that not only Christ suffered so he can relate to us, but missionaries go through hard trials so that we can relate more to him. And I know that God is involved in this work. This is his work. He's at the head of it. He could do it without us, but what a great blessing it is that he lets us be a part of it. And I know that Christ is the Savior of the world and that he lives. And like the First Presidency says in the opening title page of Preach My Gospel, more happiness awaits you as you labor among his children than you've ever experienced. And that is my testimony.
It was crazy. Italy, this was my first experience outside the US, so I was very excited. So we arrived in Rome, and it was just beautiful. It was amazing. We got to do the drive around Rome, but my first city was all the way down in Sicily. We took like a 12-hour train ride and boat ride to Sicily, and it was really different. Way different than what I expected. Sicily is definitely not like your typical classy, fancy Italy. It's definitely more, it's beautiful, but it's definitely not like Rome like you expect. But it was great. People were speaking a language I hadn't even learned or heard in the MTC. The Rome mission covers more or less the boundaries from Rome to the south of Italy, so Rome all the way down to Sicily, which includes also the island Malta, which is not part of Italy, and then also the island left of Italy, which is called Sardinia. So it's a pretty big mission. So it's basically half of Italy, and so we have the Rome Temple. It's currently being constructed. They're still working on it, and it's looking great. There are wards and branches all over Italy. Like, you can find members everywhere. And the sisters tend to serve in bigger cities. So let's see, I served in 2 wards and 2 branches. So there were quite a few members in the cities that I served in and where sisters serve. But for elders, their elders are usually placed first in an area, and so there were some areas where they served where there were maybe 1 member or 10 members. The church is definitely growing. I think there are about 26,000 members in Italy, and it's growing, and it's amazing. It's really neat. And as the Rome Temple has been constructed, I know that there have been more and more miracles, and so it's been really neat. So, general religious stance for Italians is Catholic. Most people there are Catholic, and you definitely have different kinds of people who live the Catholic faith, and you'll have those who are Catholic and practicing, and they go to church every Sunday and say their written prayers. And then you also have people who say they're Catholic, but they're not practicing. They don't. They're very adamant about them being Catholic and their ancestors being Catholic and way back there, but way back then. But they don't go to church, and maybe they don't live what they believe, I would probably say. But let's see, misconceptions. There are a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses in Italy, and love them. They're great people, really kind, and some are nicer than others. But they mistake us for them. And so we have to make it clear that, no, we're from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we just have a message, and we don't force anyone to follow what we believe. We're just here to invite people and share what we believe. And then other misconceptions, plural marriage. They think that we have polygamy, and they think we're those who don't have electricity, and we got the big beards, or for the men. For sisters, they often think we're nuns, that we are dedicating our life to this. That's great, but it's just a year and a half. I started my mission in Catania, in Sicily, and then I went to Pozzuoli, which is right outside of Naples. So went up a little further north, and then my third area was in Sardinia. So I hopped to another island, hopped off the mainland, and that was beautiful. And the city I served in was Sassari. And then I finished my mission in Rome. So I got to serve in Rome, and my ward was Rome 1. Like I said before, there are a lot of Italian gestures that actually have meanings, and Italians communicate with their hands a lot of the time, and there are lots of fun gestures that you can learn, but I guess it's important to know the meanings behind some of those gestures, because some of them have some pretty not very good meanings. So be careful when you're out in public and using those, because they can definitely be offensive. And there are definitely some American signs that we use that could come across as offensive to Italians. I don't know if I should share that now, but so rock on. That is a typical, really fun hand gesture in America. And I remember one time as a greenie, I did it to my trainer, just like randomly. I was like, yeah, and she was just like, oh, don't do that, put that away. So it just doesn't mean, you can look it up, it just doesn't have a very good meaning. But yeah, anyway, their love language is food. If you do not accept their food, like, they will be offended. And that is another thing. If you don't finish their food, they will be offended, and they will automatically go to the assumption that you think their food is disgusting. So eat everything you get and pace yourself. For do's and don'ts, there are churches all over Italy and sacred statues and things all over the place, and in the White Handbook it says not to proselyte near those statues and churches, but I will say it's probably impossible to avoid that, so don't worry too much about that, because you will run into stuff everywhere, as long as you're not like preaching inside of churches. Catholics are very, they worship saints and Mary, and I guess to just be respectful of that, and just respectful in your language. I mean, that's how it should be for every missionary, just respectful of other people's beliefs, and telling them, like, yeah, we believe that Mary and these saints were really respectable, revered people, and but we don't choose to worship them. We don't believe that that is what we're supposed to do. Yeah, you'll see big differences among all the cultures. Africans are very, very close to God. They're very religious. Africans and Filipinos are very religious and just very prepared. They're just a very happy people. They're very positive, and if they can't make it to a lesson, they'll be really happy about it, and they'll say, don't worry. Like, they just, I don't know, they don't complain. I feel like they don't complain at all. And that was really refreshing. I had some of the most spiritual lessons with Africans and Filipinos. They're definitely ready. And Romanians, I taught a couple of Romanians on my mission, and they are pretty religious. They're from the Orthodox faith, and so their beliefs are pretty similar. They're very very hard-headed, they're a little bit more difficult, not as open, I would say. Yeah, I don't know. They're just, Filipinos are very more timid and kind, and they just want to serve you and help you. And Italians are like that as well. They just want to serve you. They just want to feed you. And that is their love language. All the cultures that I ran to, they loved the missionaries. They were really kind, and they just wanted to serve you. And yeah, the food is unbelievable. It's better than I ever imagined. And I grew up in New Jersey, and so there are a lot of Italians where I grew up that have moved over to the US. And the Italian food back east is amazing. It's really good, but it does not even compare to the real thing, the real authentic thing from Italy. So you've got your pastas and pizza and gelato. But I would say a typical meal, the members will feed you a lot, which is great. And you'll start with your primo, which is your first dish, which is usually pasta. And that's fantastic. And you just have all kinds of pasta, and I could go on and on. And they just like mix. They just have such a variety of pastas that we Americans have like never even dreamed of or imagined. And then you have your secondo, which is the second dish, which is usually like meat, and they'll usually finish with a dessert, your dolce, which is cake or gelato, and then they'll actually usually finish with fruit, which is really interesting. And I actually like, because you're just so stuffed by the end of the meal. Like, you will be so stuffed that it's nice to get that fruit to just like kind of just lighten everything up, and you feel like you have energy again, and you can go out and teach that lesson or go out and work again. But yeah, just get ready for some fantastic food, and just enjoy it. Just love every bit of it. Don't have any regrets in the food you eat, because you only have a year and a half to appreciate it. I love the people. They just are so fantastic. Their culture is so just colorful and exciting, and they are very, very open. They just say it like it is. If they think you're gaining weight, they'll tell you. They're very open, which is actually really helpful in teaching the gospel, because if they have questions, they'll ask their questions, and they'll express themselves and their opinions and how they're feeling, and they don't hide anything. They really cherish family time. They really do. And I think that was the neatest thing that I learned from the Italian culture, that they just, they appreciate their family, and they just have a bond with them. And they set a big block of time aside in the middle of the day to just have this big lunch together with their family. And it's usually from about 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock, where everything shuts down. All the stores, schools, work, everything shuts down. Everyone just goes home and just has this big lunch together, and they just take their time, and they just really just cherish that family time together, and they take their nap. And that is in the southern, I would say more southern parts of Italy, that is like a no-no to contact people during that time. So that's when missionaries go home and have their lunch and do their language study. So, but the Italians are great. They're very expressive. They use their hands a lot. People say that they have that Italians can't speak if their hands were tied behind their back, but which I could say is a bit true. But yeah, they're just very fun and adamant in their facial expressions, and they're awesome. In Rome, we taught this man who was from Iran, however you say that, and he was the happiest man in the world. He was so interesting. He loved to talk and ask questions, and he was just really interested in what we had to say. So his first language is Peruvian, no, not Peruvian, Persian. But we would speak Italian with him, and then we realized he spoke quite a bit of English, so we would actually bring some Americans to the lesson, or English speakers to the lesson. Sometimes we'd bring some Filipinos, sometimes we would bring the senior couple to our lesson. And I remember one lesson where we were teaching the word of wisdom, and so we told him like all the things that we abstain from, and including alcohol. And he was shocked. He could not believe. He said, "So you've never had wine? You've never had wine?" And he just had this big smile on his face, and it was me and my companion and then the senior couple. And he went to every single person in the room. He's like, "So you've never had wine, and you've never had wine, and you've never had wine." And it was so funny because I was just laughing at, because he's such a happy man, and he wasn't just like the typical, just like really disappointed or angry, like, "I can't believe you believe in that." He was just really shocked and just happy. And I specifically remember him talking to the senior sister missionary and saying like, "So never?" And she was just like, "No, never have." And he just, "Never?" I think he asked like 3 or 4 times. And then even as we were like walking out of the church after we had finished the lesson, he had to be clear, like, "You have never had wine in your life." Yeah, so that was really fun. So I served in Rome 1. It was a ward, and so there are, I want to say 6 areas in Rome. And so I was in the first ward, and I loved it. It was such a fun area. So different from all my areas. The more north you go, the less traditional Italians are. And so people, that lunchtime, that pranzo time was not as big of a thing in Rome. I'm sure more so in big cities than it was down south. And the ward was really interesting. I would probably say it was like 60-70% South American. We had a lot of Latinos in the ward, which again felt like a mission in South America. And I loved it. A lot of Peruvians mostly. And they were so wonderful. And there were Italians as well. And they were great. Yeah, Rome, that's where you really ran into just cultures from all over the world. Every day we'd run into people from Peru, from Africa, from Romania, the Philippines, Albania, Russia, Iran. So it was really, really fun, really interesting. The work was really good. It was definitely a fun area. Actually, I got blown in or whitewashed into that area, and so we did not have any work at first, and so it was definitely a faith builder to get work going, and we saw so many miracles, and we saw the work grow, and we worked with other missionaries. There are 6 of us in the ward, so it was the 4 of us sisters with two elders. And then we also had a senior couple in the ward, an American senior couple, and they actually worked with the Pathways program. And that's actually where Pathways program is held and conducted in the Rome 1 building. And so people from all over Italy would travel up to Rome to come and attend their classes on Tuesday nights. And since then, I think they've made a Pathways program in Milan. So that was really cool. Catania is a big city in Sicily. I would say Palermo and Catania are the biggest cities in Sicily. And I was fortunate enough to go to Catania, and it is beautiful. First of all, Sicily is gorgeous. Like, you should pray to serve in Sicily because it is so beautiful, and there's just sunshine, and there's fruit. There are fruit trees everywhere you walk in the city. There will be a fruit tree. I would say the further south you go, the more traditional Italians are, traditional in their faith and their traditions and their culture. And And the biggest surprise I had about going to Sicily is that there are dialects all over Italy. And I'd probably say the most prominent dialect is Siciliano, is the Sicilian dialect. And I went down there and it was just a completely different language. But fear not, they still speak Italian. Just don't be surprised if you are walking on the street and you hear a completely different language. And I did have some moments where I'd be like, I don't understand anything, and my trainer would say, "Don't worry, it was Siciliano." I was like, oh, phew. Yeah, Sicilianos are they're very proud of their culture. I remember one time we were talking to this store owner, and he asked, like, "Where are you from?" We said, we're from America. And we said, we're like, "And you're from Italy?" And he's like, "No, I'm from Sicily." And he was completely serious. So they're very, very proud of their culture. They don't see themselves, a lot of them, probably more of the older people, don't see themselves as Italians, but as Sicilians. It's definitely a more louder culture down there, and there are a lot of crazies, crazy people. You'll definitely run into that, and which makes for more interesting journal entries and letters home. But it's really fun. I loved it. I love the people. That's where everything really, really shuts down during that lunch period, that lunchtime, and they all flock home. And it's difficult. We can't go out we can't like really get work done and find people until around 4-ish or appointments. So that's kind of hard unless you have a lunch appointment with someone or a pranzo appointment. But yeah, they're fun. In Sicily, or pretty much in all of Italy, the transportation, they use public transportation everywhere. You'll find buses everywhere. As missionaries, we use buses, trains, and walking. I would say in Sicily, that's where I did the most walking, because the bus system did not really function. At least in the city, in Catania, the buses were never on time. They just were not reliable. And so I walked the most in Catania. The general lifestyle people, they live in apartment buildings. Everyone lives in apartment buildings. When you say you're from America and you live in a house, they think you're rich. They think that is unheard of, pretty much in all of Italy, I'd say. And so people live in these big apartment buildings, and so to get into their houses, you have to ring the citofono, the doorbell. It's like this big box with these doorbells until you ring that, and then a voice box will be there, and they'll say, like, "Who is it?" And so you'll tell them who you are, and they'll either ring you in or they won't ring you in or open the door for you. And so, yeah, so you have to it's a big building. You have to get through that door, and then you have to go upstairs and get to their apartment building, or their apartment. And their typical work, I would say, is a caretaker. They take care of seniors or older folks, and also like a nanny. They'll watch kids and take them to school, and also housekeeper, a lot of cleaning. So those are definitely typical jobs that you'll run into. But I mean, I've definitely run into Italians that have been doctors or lawyers, and that are members of the church. There are a lot of foreigners in Italy, all over Italy. So yeah, a lot of your work will be with Filipinos, with Africans, Romanians, Ukrainians, you name it, they're in Italy. So Catania is a huge city, and it has, in most big cities, there's a big Duomo, or big cathedral, that is like the cathedral of the city. And so the center of Catania is really cool. And it's just beautiful. And I don't know, Sicily is definitely a little bit more dirty. you will find trash on the ground very often, but which is a pity because it's so gorgeous. It's so beautiful there. But Catania is also known for its volcano nearby, Mount Etna. It is an active volcano. Actually, currently in the world news, it's been erupting, which is really cool. Like, you can find some really cool pictures. But yeah, when I was there, every so often you'd see, like, as you would drive by, you'd see like just like a little bit of red at the top of the volcano, and you can actually go to it. And so yeah, I've been to it. Also, when you're serving in Catania, there's a military base nearby called Sigonella. And so when I was serving there, the missionaries would go to church on Sundays, and we'd often help out with less active work there. But since then, they've called senior missionary couple there, and they do service work on the base. So that was really cool to have Americans nearby. One very memorable story that comes to mind that was actually like touched me and changed, like just changed me, I think, for the rest of my life. Like it really had an impact on me. In Catania, there was this woman who was inactive, and so we would do our weekly visits with her, and she was just so kind. She was so kind and sweet, and I will preface it with the sisters before us had told us that just like beware going to her house, because she just lives in like these really just awful circumstances. There's just her dogs everywhere, and she just does not live in very good conditions at all. And beware, she'll try to serve you food that's not very kosher. And just watch out, because where she lives, it's just really gross and nasty. And so my companion and I were a little bit nervous going into her, like, oh, I don't even know how this is gonna be. And so we went into it, and sure enough, it was pretty gross. There were I don't know, where she lived was kind of sketchy. And anyway, so we went into her home and we sat down, and it didn't smell very good in her home, and it was very dirty. And so we started off by saying a prayer, and then she told us, and this is just told us this, that she really likes hymns. So we brought her hymn books, and we said, like, hey, do you want to sing a hymn? And she said, yeah, definitely. And she just had the biggest smile on her face, and she didn't have a lot of teeth, but she was just so sweet, and you could just feel her spirit. And we let her choose the hymn, and the first hymn that she flipped to was "Because I have been given much, I too must give." And that just really touched me. And I was just a greenie, and I didn't understand like hardly anything she was saying, but I just thought, wow, this woman who has nothing. She has nothing. Her husband is bedridden, and she just lives in these just really sad and awful circumstances, just loves the Lord so much. And she loved him so much that she wanted to sing this hymn, and she just had a big smile on her face. And I remember we had the most spiritual lessons with her. She didn't come to church just for reasons of embarrassment, but there are some really, really cool, strong members down there in Sicily or in all of Italy. So I learned a lot from her and her example. And it was definitely a humbling experience to go into that, and fearing like, oh, what's it going to be like? Like, what do we have to deal with? But this woman just didn't even care, and was just so happy that we were there to visit her. So I went back to an island. I went and served in Sardinia, which is to the left of Italy. And I served up north, up the northern part of the island in Sassari. And Sardinia is just as beautiful as Sicily, but I guess you have like your different kinds of beautiful. Sardinia is really definitely known for its beaches. The water is like crystal clear, blue and beautiful, and oh, it's like incredible. But I served in Sassari, which is probably the most modern city that I served in Italy. It just, people say it feels the most like America in the Rome mission. Just the streets are huge, and things function. The bus system totally functions, and yeah, it's just really interesting. The people were very, just really kind and just really wonderful. I think there's the common reputation that Sard people from Sardinia are just really like hard-hearted and just like, I don't know, but I didn't find that. I found that they were really warm and wonderful and just very Italian. And I also served in a branch there, and I loved it. The members were so fantastic and just warm and inviting, and they cared so much about the missionaries, and they were just really great. And I just in all my areas, but I loved Sassari. Like, there were so many people that were just really kind and just wanted to help the missionaries out. And the work was definitely a struggle at first for us, but it grew. It definitely grew. And in Sassari, we found this one girl named Stefania, and she was just so good down to the bone. She was so kind, and she just had like such a light to her. She was really sweet and really happy. She just had so many struggles, so many trials with her family, with her health, and with her job situation. And she definitely would like to vent about all the things that she had to that she was going through. And it was so sad because she was just so kind and loving. Like, we'd bring her to activities, and you could just see the love that she had for other people. And that was really, really touching. Just see that was really touching about my mission, just meeting so many different people of other faiths and just seeing what a light that they had, and that they just had so much good in them. And there are people who are prepared to hear the fullness of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And she was really sweet, and it was just really neat to see how she just became close to her Heavenly Father. And we would ask her to say the prayer, and she would just give the most sincere prayers. And she would tell us how she's just strengthening her relationship with Heavenly Father. And you could just see that change from the time that we first started teaching her to the end. And anyways, yeah, she eventually got baptized a while after I'd left the city. And so people change, and their light grows even more. It was in Pozzuoli, so it was just outside of Naples, and it was also really pretty there. There are not a lot of sisters that serve in the Naples zone because of it's known for being quite a dangerous area, or at least Naples is, the city of Naples. And so sisters don't serve in Naples, at least for now. But so it was just the two of us in my area, and we were with two elders, and it was just a branch. And it was a really interesting branch. It was probably divided up into 3 parts, and there was also another military base nearby. So there were a lot of Americans that didn't want to live on the base, that lived out in like the Italian neighborhoods, and so they lived near our branch in Pozzuoli. And so the branch is probably divided in 1/3 Italian, 1/3 American, and 1/3 African. So you had all different cultures going on, and it was actually really fun. You got like the best of 3 worlds. And it was just really pretty. Pozzuoli is a beautiful city, just gorgeous, and it's right near the shore, near the ocean, and so there's a boardwalk in the city. And yeah, it was just a really quaint really cute town. And so you have like your Italian side of Pozzuoli, and then you have your, I guess, African side. We take this big nasty bus to like about 45 minutes away to these big city called Castelvolturno, where it's known for mostly Africans that live there, and so you'd have different sides, and Italians live there as well. But that was really fun to just be able to teach the Italian culture, and then also it just felt like I was serving a mini mission in Africa. And I loved the Africans. That's where I really started to teach them and get to know them. And then Naples is right nearby. It's not in our area, but we were able to go there for P Day. And when I was there, we had district meeting there, but I don't think they do district meeting there anymore. Also in that area, they speak the dialect of Napoletano. So I guess Neapolitan, I guess that's how you'd say it. And that is a completely different language, and they speak that pretty heavily there, but they do speak Italian. But it's fun. I have been in some lessons where some people just like, they forgot their Italian, and so you're just struggling to like, and praying to be able to understand what they're saying with their Napoletano. The pizza is fantastic there. Eat as much pizza as you can get, because Naples is known. It is like the capital of pizza of the world. So you will enjoy some pretty dang good pizza there. There's also a volcano nearby, Mount Vesuvius. It's actually in Naples, and so you can see that. And our church was actually so it was a branch, and it wasn't in a typical church building, but it was in, I believe it was just like some huge apartment building that we just bought out. I think it actually used to be like some kind of grocery store. And so it's a really interesting layout of a church. It's like 3 levels. Yeah, I loved it. It was really good. Definitely have funny memories from being on that bus that we would take out to that city where most Africans lived. Yeah, they just, I don't know, it was just, it was kind of hit or miss with the bus, and because it was such a long bus ride, you would want to get a seat, or else you would just be standing the whole way. And more often than not, it would be chock full of people standing up. And I just remember it would get to our bus stop near our apartment, and the doors would open, and it would just be chock full to the brim of people, and mostly Africans, because that's where they're heading. They would come and work in Naples, and then they would take their bus all the way back. And so you would just have to like dive in and squeeze in. So you get used to it. But I guess, I don't know, I had some definitely fun, colorful experiences on the bus. So just try to get a seat whenever you can, and avoid the crazy people. But you'll be all right. Like, I should have said this my first city, but I just, you just feel protected. And I think if I went back now and I was walking around just not as a missionary, I would definitely feel a lot more fear. But I just think that the Lord protects you so much. And I remember asking my trainer this, that I just walking through crazy Sicily and crossing like kind of crazy streets, and she was just like always had a smile on her face, and I just thought, like, is she scared? Like, this is kind of scary. Like, if my parents knew I was here. But one time I asked her, I was just like, so do you get scared, or are you not really scared because you're a missionary? And she's like, yeah. Because I'm a missionary, I don't feel that need to like fear. So, I mean, it's important to be smart and to follow mission rules and follow traffic rules and crossing the street and things like that. And obviously follow the Spirit, but generally you'll be protected. Definitely. We taught this one man named Pepe, and he this was in Pozzuoli in Naples. And he was this like 74-year-old man. And when I came into the area, the sisters before me had found him, and he was golden. He was so good. And he was such an amazing man. I respect him so much for what he has given up. And that is not a difficult thing. That is a pretty big feat to find an old Italian Catholic man willing to take the discussions and eventually get baptized. And he gave up his, he was practicing a Catholic religion, and he gave up alcohol, he gave up smoking, he gave up so much. He gave up, he risked family relationships for the church because he felt so strongly about it. And he's definitely not like your typical sweet, like grandfatherly man. He, even though he has really sweet intentions, he's just like really intense when he talks to you. But anyway, I remember, a really sweet experience that so we would teach him on a bench outside of his store. He and his wife owned a store nearby, and so we teach him on a bench. And so we would often teach him in the daytime, and then we'd have to run and get a bus and take it to another city. And I remember it was my companion and me, and we had to go. We were saying, okay, Pepe, like, I think we ended with a prayer, and we said, we have to go catch the bus. And all of a sudden he started talking about, started sharing an experience with us. He's like, yeah, the other day my car broke down, and my companion and I were like looking at each other like, oh, he's gonna go into this whole like monologue, and we have to go. And he started talking about how like his car broke down and something like that with his car, and he was just like really frustrated, and he didn't know what to do, and he was just going on and sharing all these details, and all of a sudden he just started to break down a little bit and just started to cry, and he just said, and I prayed to Heavenly Father to help me and to help me get this fixed. And he's definitely not an emotional man. And so it was just a really sweet experience. And he just said how the Lord blessed him, and he knew that the Lord answered his prayer and helping him fix his car. And we just had to like stop and just like forget everything and just listen. And it was a really touching experience. That was really neat. In Rome, yeah, the crime rate is definitely up there. Be careful. You'll run into it everywhere. Just, sisters, keep your bags across your shoulders at all times and keep it zipped, because I got robbed in Rome. It was like my last 2 weeks in the mission. I gotten that far to not ever being robbed, and I was going down a subway, going down the metro, down the escalator, and I had my bag on my one shoulder, which was not good, and I think I had my bag zipped closed. I'm pretty sure I did, but there's a chance I didn't. And so anyway, I went down, and it was P-Day, and we took the metro into the center of Rome. And I saw my bag was open. I whipped open my bag and I thought, that's weird. Why is my bag open? I did the quick check, my wallet, my camera, and I found my camera. Could not find my wallet. My wallet was gone. And I cried. Anyway, went back, and we realized, I think, that it was down that escalator that guy just came in and just stuck his hand right in. But another thing is, when you're waiting on the metros, there are piles of people that are going in, and there are definitely people they're these like little Romanian girls, and they seem really sweet, but don't be deceived, because they wear these huge bags that are like more higher up on their waist, and they'll come up to you and they'll like put their bag, so you're squished with a ton of people, and they'll put your bag onto your bag, pretending like they're squished into you, and then they'll like maneuver their hand out of their bag into yours. So I've had a couple try that on me, but I was prepared. So just be careful. The mafia is definitely more prevalent in Sicily. For sure. Sicily and Naples. It's definitely more dangerous in both those areas, and I served in both of them. But I didn't see anything super sketchy. I think there were some false alarms. I remember I was in Sicily, and my companion and I were waiting at a bus stop, and we all of a sudden saw this big car zoom by, big like Suburban or something, with a guy with his head like stuck out the window, and he was just holding this huge gun, like shooting like behind him, and my heart like stopped beating, and my companion like grabbed my arm, and because we thought it was like in a car chase, like shooting. And anyway, then another car zoomed right behind it, and a guy was sticking at himself outside the window, and he was holding like this huge video camera. So they were just like shooting a movie or something. So it was a false alarm, but we had to laugh, and I just thought like that would not be allowed in America. That would not fly. But yeah, so I know that there was behind the scenes mafia stuff going on, but I honestly didn't ever run into anything. I mean, there was some speculation with the missionaries and things like that, but no. And I would have to say lasagna. I had an Italian companion from Bolzano, and from northern Italy, and she made the most fantastic lasagna of my life. It was so good. Oh man. But yeah, I'd probably say that's my favorite. But the cannolis in Sicily were divine. They were so good. I ate a sheep's brain. It was kind of a dare. It was at a party, and sister missionaries were all doing it, and so I joined in. But yeah, there actually wasn't like super crazy. Like all the food was amazing. There was in Sardinia. This is good to know. There's this worm cheese that Sardinia is known for, and it is a delicacy there. Like it is super expensive, and people think it is delicious. And anyway, so you can get your two different types of worm cheese. You can get just like, and I haven't had it. Apparently it's illegal, but Italians get their hands on it. So it means like cheese with like dead worms living in it, or cheese with actually real live worms in it. So I don't really recommend it because I don't know what it can do to your body, but some missionaries have taken on the challenge, and they can brag about that. I think the biggest thing for me that I've learned is the power of listening. That is such an amazing quality that we can show as missionaries, as friends, as a mission companion, that we have a duty and a privilege to show love to others, just as Jesus Christ did. And the way that we do that is through listening. I've learned more than ever in my mission just the power of love and what it can do for people, what it can do for yourself when you serve and you're giving your all to the Lord. I've learned to really just respect other people and just come to have the desire to learn about people. I think being home, I would love to learn about other cultures, other religions, so that I have a deeper knowledge and respect for people. So when I go forth to try and share the gospel and share what I know, I'd be ready to share because I'd understand their background, and it'd be more like a conversation, I don't know, just having the desire to learn, that is definitely something that I grasped on my mission. I mean, I'm sure all missionaries do. You learn so much in your mission, and you have the desire to learn everything about the gospel. And so I think that has been really big, just having this immense desire to learn about people, learn about cultures, and just really study the doctrine and apply it to your life. We had an investigator in Rome he was from Romania, and he was so close to God, unbelievably close. When he was younger, he was preparing to be a priest, but he didn't take that pathway, and he eventually ended up moving to Rome, and now he works in the city. And he said he felt that the Book of Mormon was true, and he could feel it, and we knew he could feel it because the Spirit was so strong in those lessons, and you could not even deny that Spirit. And I remember one lesson we taught him, so he would read the Book of Mormon and he loved it. He just ate everything up. He would highlight the things that he liked in the Book of Mormon with his mechanical pencil, and he just treated his Romanian Book of Mormon as just gold. And he'd just give really sweet, sincere prayers. And I remember one lesson we taught him about fasting, and we challenged him to fast to get an answer, to know if the Book of Mormon is true. Or specifically, because he knew the Book of Mormon is true, but I think the hardest thing for him, he would say, I don't want to renounce my faith in the Orthodox Church. And so we'd teach him about, we'd highlight what the restored gospel means and the power of the priesthood. And anyway, we taught him about fasting, and we invited him to fast to know if he should be baptized into Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so he accepted the invite, and we actually fasted along with him. And I actually had to go on exchange to another city that night when we were fasting. And anyway, I think a really powerful experience for me was just ending my fast that night and just focusing my fast completely on somebody else, on an investigator, was a really powerful and life-changing experience. And I think my testimony for fasting just grew so much to realize wow, this is an opportunity to receive the blessings from heaven. And we saw that the next day. We saw him, and I was able to talk to him, and he shared his experience of his fast, and he shared some thoughts and new insights that he had, that he just felt like he felt really good when he was with us, when he'd come to church with us, when he'd learn the lessons and study with us. And he said, I have never felt that good. Even from growing up, I've never felt this way. So I think just teaching really amazing people like Nico, that really just brought the Spirit, and it changed my life. First of all, congratulations on your call to the Rome, Italy mission, if you've been called there. It has completely changed my life. And I know everyone says this, but it is the best mission in the world. I know wherever you serve, you can say that. But I have come to love the people of Italy so much, and it's definitely been difficult being home because I miss the people that I've come to know and love, but just in general, the Italian culture and the Italian language. I guess what I'd want to share with you is going into the mission that I know is that the mission changes people. And that is what the gospel is. The gospel is a gospel of change, and you will grow more than you ever have. And the mission will be individual, will be something personal and personalized for you, and that it is a different experience for each person. And I learned so many different things that and you'll learn different things than what I've learned from my different experiences. And the Lord just puts you exactly where you need to be, puts you with the companions that you need to be, and with the investigators and members that you need to be. And I know more than ever, and I knew before my mission, the gospel was true, but I can honestly say without a doubt that I have grown to really come and appreciate and revere and Jesus Christ, our Savior, so much. I know that He lives. I know it. And I know that He will bear you up through your trials as you're there, and He will bear up those burdens that you experience and the burdens that your investigators experience. A lot of people say that the mission is such a sacrifice. My older sister served a mission, and she said that she heard this one missionary say, you know what, the mission is a big sacrifice. Like, you give up a lot, you give up your work, you give up school, boyfriends, girlfriends, you give up so much for the 1.5 or 2 years that you go. But more than that, it is a privilege. It is such a privilege, and I do not regret it at all. I am so grateful for the opportunity that I've had to go and serve and love these people. I know without a doubt the Book of Mormon is the Word of God, and it can bring us closer to God more than anything else. And I saw that, and my testimony for the Book of Mormon grew more than ever. And I think, and I know that as we preach the gospel, as we share our testimonies, and not just converse with people, but as we preach what we know and testify to them, that they will feel that light. I know that there are prepared people in the land of Italy, and I know that He has sent that God has sent you there for a reason. I know that Jesus Christ is the Savior, and He is the ultimate reason why I decided to go on a mission, and I love that. And I know this is true, and I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
My sister started out in the Padova mission, which then divided into Milano and Rome. Her mission president became the mission president of Rome, and she went to the Milano mission. So she came back. 2 weeks later, I left. So I had some time to learn a bit about Italy and the language and the president. And he absolutely adored my sister. I mean, he was one of his favorite missionaries ever. So when they got word that I was coming, they called my house and spoke to me directly. So I'd already gotten to talk to him on the phone. Then we flew out, and it was hot. It was late August. It was August 29th, I think, I got there. And it was so hot. And if you're not used to humidity, I grew up in Georgia, so I was a little bit prepared for humidity, but the humidity was horrible. It was 90-something%, and it was just, whoa. Everyone's clothes were sticking to their body, and we'd been awake for 30-some-odd hours. We had to fly through Munich and had like a 6-hour layover and some delays, and it was really muggy. But not a single person was miserable. We were all super excited. Like, everyone got their homesickness over with in the MTC, and we were all just so excited to be there finally, because it felt like the MCC took forever to get through. We loved it, but it took forever. and I was so excited to speak to people. The assistants to the president and the mission president came and picked us up at the airport. And President Jensen is one of my favorite people in the world. He just gave everybody a smile and a huge hug and welcomed us all. And the way I like to say it is, if you can imagine a human being that looks like Humpty Dumpty, that's my mission president. He was a teddy bear, a spiritual giant, but just a real sweetheart. And they all took us they didn't take us straight to the mission home. We went straight to the mission office, and all our luggage went to the mission home. So we just kind of all felt disoriented, had no idea what was going on or where we were. Then they just had us dump our stuff eventually took us to the mission home, just had us like freshen up for about 20 minutes. And they took us straight out to St. Paul's outside the walls, which is this beautiful old cathedral, and has some interesting references which can be correlated with Mormon worship. It was originally built in 500 AD, so not too long after the apostasy. And there were some interesting things which, you don't want to speculate too far, but could be holdovers. To give you an idea of the extent of mafia in Castellammare or in Catania, in the biggest mob days of the United States, like right as Vegas was really getting started and everything, there were two really big mafia wars that happened. One is called the Castellammarese War, because of all the mob bosses that came from Castellammare. The other one is called the Siciliano War, because of everyone that came from Sicily, Sicilia. And it's a lot of our mafia originated in Italy. There's the Russian mob and the Ukrainian mob and all these others, but a lot of our mafia started in Italy. It's huge. They're not allowed to build up, because nothing is allowed to be higher than St. Peter's, which is the basilica, the cathedral of the Vatican. Now, you're going to learn there's a difference between a Duomo and a basilica. A Duomo is the cathedral of the city. It's the main cathedral, the crowning cathedral. And a basilica doesn't have a bishop that's in charge of it. A Duomo does. So, the Duomo is St. Peter's, even though technically it's in Vatican City, which isn't quite the same as Rome, but you don't know the difference. It's just a few blocks. And I lived 5 minutes from the Vatican. We used to go on a morning run, and we'd go through the Vatican by the Vatican. We were in running shorts, and you can't go in the Vatican with shorts. But we'd go right by the Vatican, right by the walls. And the thing that struck me is everything was old, and there were no skyscrapers in Rome. Because the cathedral, the spire of the cathedral, is supposed to be the tallest thing in Rome. And the Italian church wasn't united until 1870, or the Italian country wasn't united until 1870. And there was a huge, they called it the Papal States. There was this huge band of a couple of city-states. From the time of Rome, they were all just separate city-state factions, kind of speaking their own languages. Italian was just the language that Dante wrote, and everybody read Dante's Inferno, so everybody learned Florentino, and that's what became Italian. So if you go to Florence, that's where the most pure Italian is spoken, except for their slight, they say H's instead of C's. Other than that, it's pure Italian. But as Italy united, the Papal States were the last things to go, because the Italian government was afraid to attack it, or they'd get in trouble with Spain and France and any of the other Catholic countries. And so finally, all the other countries were involved in wars elsewhere, and so they just quickly invaded and took it while everybody else was busy. But they left them the Vatican. So the Vatican is what's left of the Papal States. When they did that, there was not a lot of kind feeling toward the Pope. They were Catholic, and as they'll tell you, my grandmother was Catholic, my grandfather was Catholic, I was born Catholic, I'm going to die Catholic. So they're very Catholic people. Whether or not they believe in the Pope, whether or not they're fighting a war against the Pope, they're still very Catholic. And he, of course, excommunicated Vittorio Emanuele, who's their George Washington, their first president. And there wasn't a lot of kind feeling toward the Pope. So they built this huge monument. The Pope was imprisoned over here, and the Vatican was over here, so he had to go this route to work. And they built this huge monument right there in the middle of it. And there had been a law for a long time, you can't build anything higher than St. Peter's. And so it goes up to within about 6 feet of St. Peter's. But then they put an angel statue on top of it with these wingtips that go 2 feet higher than St. Peter's, just to show it. Technically, the building isn't higher than St. Peter's, just the statue on the top. So they found this loophole to kind of stick it to him. And even now, a lot of people in Rome who are older people will tell you that they remember their grandparents talking about when the popes ruled Rome and how it was not a good time for anyone. They'd say, erano brutti tempi, they were ugly times. And it was Yeah, it's just an interesting fact about Rome. They don't build anything that high. It's 9 stories roughly, maybe 10. But there are no real skyscrapers. And it's ancient. I trained a greenie while I was in Rome itself. And we had a lot of contacts in what's called the Cradle of Rome, which is the area from Piazza del Popolo to the Roman Forum. It's the oldest area of Rome. And people are living in these apartment buildings that were built 1,000 years ago. They've just, put plumbing in and electricity in, and they've got vaulted ceilings in their apartment. I mean, a couple of them even had frescoes, these hundreds of years old frescoes just in their living room. And bare stone walls. It was really cool. But I remember I had my greenie with me, and I'd been in Rome at this point in the mission about a year. And so I was kind of used to some of the older things. Like, I never got used to Italy. I never got used to being in one of the biggest tourist destinations in the world. Every time I'd look up, I'd be like, whoa, look at that castle. Whoa, look at that ancient Roman theater, just all over the place. And they had so many castles, half of them were in ruins because they just didn't have enough money to keep them all up. So anyway, I had my greenie with me, and we went by the Colosseum. And then there's this place called Il Teatro di Marcello. And it's like the Colosseum, except it's in better repair, and it's made out of white stone instead of like this gray, dingy, sandy color. So it's really breathtaking. But I was really frustrated because then they built all this modern apartment building garbage on the top of it. And people live up there now. And so I was telling him about this as we were rounding the corner. I'm like, and it's really beautiful, or it would be, except that, gah. And we rounded the corner, and he's like, where's the old stuff? I mean, where's the new modern junk that they put on the top? And I'm like, well, it's right there on the top. And he's like, dude, that looks like it's at least 700 years old. And I was like, oh, you're right. But because the theater was built in 400 AD, it seems that the apartment on top, which was built in 1400, seems really ugly and new compared to the rest of it. And here's an interesting fact few people know, is that you go to Piazza Navona or almost any square or area that is oblong-shaped or circle-shaped, began as a Roman theater or a Roman chariot stadium. Piazza Navona is a very famous one. It's long and elliptical. And it's, if you've ever seen Ben-Hur, they do the chariot races in Circus Maximus. That's now just a park. The whole thing came tumbling down, and it's now just a park. But it's got this elliptical-shaped ditch, which is most of what's left. But Piazza Navona is a little bit bigger. And it used to be a theater, a chariot race theater. But as the Roman Empire fell, and everything fell into slums and ruin, and nobody could afford anything, they would build shacks on the bleachers, because you got your ceiling and you got your wall. And then those shacks turned into apartment buildings. Those apartment buildings turned into really nice apartment buildings and banks and things like that. But people just built buildings out of the theater and then replaced the old with new. So a lot of the circular and oblong-shaped squares or piazzas, which have almost all of them have little fountains in them, are built out of ancient Roman theaters. Every once in a while you still find a couple of the old blocks where things used to be, and you can kind of see, oh yeah, that's where the theater used to be. They have Halloween, but it's kind of like ours, but the reason why we celebrate Halloween in America is because of All Hallows Eve, right? All Hallows Day is November 1st. It's supposedly the holiest day of the year. That comes from Catholic tradition. So it's a very Catholic holiday, you would think, except it's not. What happens is that they have a day for each saint. This is St. Michael's Day, this is Saint this, and like Henry V, he gives a speech on St. Crispin's Day. And so there are all these saints' days. And we celebrate St. Patrick's Day, and St. Valentine's Day. That's pretty much all that we celebrate. But there are all these other saints' days, and we celebrate them in a very different fashion. I mean, St. Patrick's Day is a day to go out and get drunk. And St. Valentine's Day is just a day to give people Valentines. But in Italy, they're much more about the saints and the lives of the saints. Well, there are only 365 days in the year, and there are a few thousand saints. So they have All Saints' Day. So this is, we ran out of days for each saint. So we're just going to put all the rest on November 1st. And that's All Saints' Day. It's supposedly the holiest day in the year because you're celebrating the days of all of the saints. Not just, they didn't want to say just the ones who don't have days, so it's every saint. It's St. Peter's Day, which they have like probably 3. It's St. Valentine's Day, it's St. Crispin's Day, it's everybody's saint's day. Because of that, the unholiest night must come right before then. And that's why we celebrate Halloween, is to frighten away all the evil spirits that are certainly roaming around. We put on these scary costumes. And a lot of us know this, but we don't usually think about All Saints' Day that comes the day after. That's a huge holiday in Italy. Everybody goes to put flowers on the graves of the people who've gone before and to pray for them. Because the Catholic tradition usually believes that if you died not believing, or if you died sinful, then you go to purgatory to burn out your impurity and to be taught to, well, they don't really think to be taught to believe. If you don't believe, you're just toast. But you go there to burn out your impurity. They don't have the same understanding that we do of the atonement, removing our sin from us so that we don't suffer for our sins. Christ has suffered for our sins, and we take advantage of that atonement. They believe that Christ suffered, which makes him holy. Suffering makes you holy. So therefore Christ suffered, which makes him holy. But that doesn't do anything for your sins. You just have to get more good than you have sins to cover your sins. And if you don't, you burn off the excess of sins you have, and then you're able to go elsewhere. So they pray for their beloved who have died and are probably in purgatory. And they go to pray to all the saints. Because of the holiest day of the year, that prayer will be more effective. So everyone goes to, like they have work off, and if you're going to be in a vehicle at all, they didn't have private cars while I was there, but if you're an assistant to the president, you actually have a car. Try not to drive on November 1st. You're not going to get anywhere. But they only have an Americanized version of Halloween. They had pretty much dropped that part of that's the only thing that we have of that whole All Saints' Day holiday, but it's kind of come back over from the United States because it's a fun little thing, and people kind of enjoy it. So there are a lot of what are called zingari, gypsies, basically people whose parents came from, great-great-grandparents came from Romania or Armenia or somewhere, and came to Italy, and the Italians don't think very well of them. When you think gypsies, you usually think this cool little cart and this specific style of clothing and entertainment and all that kind of stuff. And that's not really what they are. Maybe that's what they used to be, but now they're pretty much pickpockets and beggars and prostitutes, and they wear whatever people have cast off, so usually in sweatpants and some shirt that doesn't quite fit, maybe has a stain or two, and they have their own culture and their own little language, and they have a pride in and of themselves because they've been mistreated for the last couple hundred years just because of who they were. Italians didn't want foreign immigrants taking their jobs, taking their money, and so they kind of been shoved into this lifestyle. And because of all of the pickpockets due to this zingara lifestyle, you kind of want to make sure you protect yourself. So I would recommend carrying as little as you can, especially because big bulky bags, when you're knocking on the door, people don't want to let someone who's got a huge bulky bag. So I usually carried nothing any larger than this. This was actually one that I used on my mission. And Rome itself was a walking city, and a lot of the others were walking cities. I was only in one bicycle city. Most of them are walking / train bus. The transit's really good there, except when they go on strike, which is something important. But you just want small stuff, as little as you can. And I had this on one strap because if it's a backpack, you can't always keep an eye on it. But if it's just one strap, I can have it on my back as I'm walking down the street or knocking on doors, and then it's not this big bulky bag, which I'm standing at the door and I got this big bulky bag. But then when I'm on a bus or a train, you can just kind of rest your hands on it and have it in front of you. Christmas is oddly more Christ-centered than in America. It's not just because everybody's Catholic. It's because they don't do the gift exchange until the Befana. The Befana is when they do their stocking. The Befana is the Christmas witch, and she comes, I'm trying to remember, I think it's January 8th. I can't remember, but it's a little bit after Christmas. My wife and I love that. We really wish that we could do that with our kids, but then they'd be upset that they weren't getting presents on Christmas, because we both feel that the exchanging of gifts often stops us from really remembering what Christmas is all about. But for them, it's more like a Thanksgiving celebration. Like they have a big family dinner, and they just have some family time and some games, and they'll usually exchange one or two small gifts, but then most of the gifts will happen on the Giorno della Befana, the Christmas witch. Given that Italian doctrine differs slightly, depending on where you are, different saints are more important. In Assisi, it's St. Francis. A lot of places, it's St. Mary, or while I was there, and it probably will still be this way, Padre Pio. He was a very recent one. 1960, he was actually excommunicated. But so many people began to follow him. He'd walk around doing miracles, and he had the stigmata, the marks of the crucifixion, which is a sign that he was allowed to participate in the suffering of Christ, which is a doctrine that they believe in, and that's very important to know, because that is why they hold Padre Pio in such esteem. They believe that the suffering was so great that even God himself could not bear all of it, which God himself being Christ, because they believe in the Trinity. Therefore, parts of this atonement were parceled out to saints. Now, depending on who you ask, it's different. Usually it's 3 different people. For most of them, it's Padre Pio, St. Francis, and St. Mary. They were 3 of the biggest. But when I was in Castellammare, San Catello was also introduced. He was a big saint down there, or San Gennaro. He was a big saint down there, which is why in the south you meet a lot of people named Catello or Gennaro. But depending on where you are, there are slightly different beliefs regarding this. But usually they believe that there are some people who have, I think, 8 marks of the stigma. There's the spear between the ribs, the crucifixion marks in the hands and in the feet, the piercing of that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm missing a couple, but the piercing on the forehead where the crown of thorns was pushed on. And these different marks, which are supposed to signify that these people are particularly holy. Now, in almost all cases, they'll cover these marks up, because if you're not holy, you aren't supposed to see it. So, Padre Pio wore fingerless gloves all of his days. So the question is, did he really have a stigma? Did he not? And then when they were pulled off, of course, at death, all these wounds are healed. So maybe he actually did have a festering thing in his hand, and it was just, but they were expecting, I think, a hole all the way through. He did have something in his hand, some scarring at least, but depends on who you ask as to what was exactly in his palms and what that meant. But there's one thing that I noticed right off the bat when I saw 2 Italians in the bus. I got on the bus, and within a few seconds, I saw these 2 Italians screaming at each other, just in each other's faces, and their hands flailing, and their faces really animated and really heated. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think they're going to kill each other. And I leaned over to the APs, and I'm like, shouldn't we do anything? And he's like, no. And I'm like, what are they fighting about? We should do something. And he's like, no, he's telling him a joke. That's just the way that they talk, and it's true. When they get excited, they get louder and seem more, they're just very passionate people. So the way they express everything is 120%. And you kind of have to get used to that. It's just how they talk. And I came home, and my parents say that when my brother and sister and I speak Italian to each other, that we get louder and animated, and they're always going, shh, we're inside the house. You're 2 feet away from each other. Shh. They have a ton of Catholic holidays that, like they believe that they know the date when Mary was told that she would be expecting the Christ child. And they celebrate that. L'Annunzio, the announcement. They have a day where Mary ascended into heaven. Mary is a very big saint for them. If you need any official document from Italy, it's going to be a long, arduous process, worse than in the USA, worse than the Department of Motor Vehicles, unless you know a guy, which sounds very Italian, very mafioso. It is. So we knew a guy, and so it only took us each about an hour, but we had 15 missionaries, so we were there for a while. We'd always heard that the city fountains and piazzas are different at night, and that's true. If you ever get the chance, just, walk by a really nice fountain at night, like the Fountain of Trevi or the Spanish Steps or Piazza Navona or Piazza Barberini, or there are thousands of them. It's called the City of Fountains for a reason. And in Italy it's called the City of Fountains. Everywhere else I guess it's the Eternal City. But they're beautiful, all lit up. It's kind of like a temple at night, only without all the spiritual grandeur. The thing you'll want to be the most careful about is the mafia. The more you hear about a mafia in the city, usually it's the less strong it is. If people are afraid to speak of it, that usually means it's a lot more present. The other rule of thumb is the farther north you go, the less mafia. The farther south you go, the more. And mafia really isn't as much of a problem as you'd think. You see these movies where the mafia are kind of romanticized, and they're all these really good guys, and they just are this band of brothers. It's not usually quite so much that way. But there are a number of mafia that are very religious. And some of them, that's a bad thing because that's a bad thing in relation to us because we're not Catholic. But some of them, as long as you're professing the name of Jesus Christ, they'll respect you. And then there are some of them that are just plain criminals. Think the hardest, most homicidal gangster you can imagine, and that's these guys. They kill a lot of people. But I had an experience where we actually taught a mob boss's wife, and we didn't know that at the time. We were in this area called, backing up a little bit, I was near Napoli. There's this town outside Napoli called Castellammare, which means castle by the sea. Castle by the sea, and it has this castle up on the hill by the sea, and it's beautiful. I try not to have a favorite area, but that was my favorite area. It was amazing. The people were great. The farther south you go, the more open people are to let you in. The less they'll get around to doing the reading and the coming to church and the following up with commitments, but they're far more willing to listen. We always had our appointment book full and really good people, humble people. A lot of them didn't know how to read. The farther north, the more prideful, but when they get interested, they'll keep with their commitments, and they'll probably be more likely to get baptized. But in the south, they're poorer. The mafia saps their money. And Castellammare is where most of the mob bosses lived. They do their work in Napoli, and they live in Castellammare. Like right near our house, a block and a half away, there was this huge house with these big old gates around it, and spikes and razor wire on the top, huge dogs patrolling it, all kinds of cameras and motion sensors everywhere. And I never asked, but I can tell you that's a mob boss's house. You kind of learn to recognize that sort of thing. And there was the Omobono d'Alessandro and the Scarpa clan, and usually if you're in the area who the clans are. In Napoli they have this whole page. They have the sports page and the gossip page, and then they have the mafia page. And it was always featuring these guys, and we couldn't read the newspaper, but you see them everywhere. And even without that, you just come to learn kind of who the clans are, and you don't necessarily, unless you've lived there for 10 years or so, you don't know who on the street is mafia, but the people who live there do. And they'll usually just say it in a kind of euphemistic way. Scansano was one of these zone particolari, and it's just that that's where we were told to do a lot of our proselyting in this one particular time, and we went up and down the streets quite a bit. Now, when I transferred down to this area, usually the mafia are fairly peaceful with each other. They know where their boundaries are, and they don't mess with the others. But every now and again, one of them fiddles with the borders, and they move into someone else's territory. And usually if there are more than two clans and they get in a battle, then the other guy will try and attack them while they're busy attacking each other, and that's what happened. And there were a number of nights where we'd be awakened from our sleep by the sound of machine gun fire. The mafia were thick enough in Castellammare that you weren't ever supposed to wear anything that obscured your face. If you wore a ski mask, a helmet with a mirrored visor, a full helmet with just the visor right here, you're a hitman. And people know that. If you ever see someone riding around on a Ducati motorcycle and they have a mirrored visor, go the opposite direction of wherever they're going. We had that on a number of occasions where we'd see someone just ripping by with a mirrored visor, and pretty soon we'd hear gunshots. In all of this, however, the danger to us we never felt was great. There'd be times when we were in Scansano, one of the worst parts of town, and we'd be in some little corner alleyway, because that's where most people lived, and that's where we ended up finding most of our contacts. It's down these little alleys which twist into little other alleys in really weird ways. The place had been bombed out, and they built out of the husks of the buildings that were left. And so you have these really squirrely alleyways that sometimes go up and through part of a building and then down. And it's really weird. But really cool at the same time, and really dangerous. But there'd be times when you'd just be walking and not even paying particular attention to the Spirit and where it's directing us to go at the time. We're having a conversation about something, and we're just knocking on doors, and all of a sudden the Spirit says, "Don't go down this street anymore. Turn around and go back the other way." And it was very specific. And we'd both feel it very strongly. And we'd say, well, here we go. And we'd turn and go somewhere else. And then the next day there'd be a big thing that 6 people were killed down that alleyway that day. And that happened once or twice a week during the time I was there. It was a particularly dangerous time. It's not usually nearly so active. But it happened fairly often. Italian comes with hand signals. Like, people always say, yeah, Italians talk with their hands. It's very, very true. There's actually a sign language that is associated with it. Like, we have utterances that aren't words. Like, someone asks you a question, you go, oh, that means I don't know. To an Italian, that's really weird. Or uh-huh and uh-uh. They can't tell the difference between the two. But they're not words, yet they're communications. With Italians, they do that with hands. And this, it goes with the word occhio, which is eye. It's keep your eye out. Be careful. Watch yourself. It's also the word furbo, which is sneaky. Like, you have to watch that guy. And they do that quite a bit. Or if you ever see someone do this, that means stealing. They just wiggle their fingers like, hey, be careful when you go down this street. They're just telling you people try and steal stuff from you. Or if they do this, that might be your life is a little bit more in danger kind of thing. Or they'll say, it's a zona particolare. It's a particular zone of the town. You don't want to go there if they say it's a zona particolare. I was there when Pope John Paul died. And while I was there, hearing the things that he told the people, because they'd usually tell us, he had a message every Tuesday, and they'd tell us what he told us in the message, and we'd usually get to hear it. It was kind of, it would always be in the papers, and it was kind of like their mini general conference. And he'd just give a little 15-minute devotional each week from his balcony. And I was impressed by him. I really felt that he was a good man who was trying to do what he could to help people draw closer to God. Whether or not he had the truth, I felt that he was doing the best that he knew how. And, I don't know much about the Pope that they have now, but I was really impressed by how many people in the Catholic religion felt that their religion had strayed from the truth, but that it was still the best tool that they had to get close to God. And so they used it the best that they could. No air conditioning. They don't believe in air conditioning. They think that if you're sweating and you get a draft of like a breeze or a draft of cold air, you'll get what they call colpa d'aria, which means like a blast of air. And that will freeze your immune system for a few seconds. And that will allow viruses to, invade your vital organs and you might die. There's something like 100 deaths a year in Italy that are put down by medical doctors as colpa d'aria. And it's just a thing about their society. And I wrote home about this, and I said, this is absolutely ridiculous and laughable. I mean, like, I had a little fan that I brought with me from the MTC, a little face fan, And I got on the bus, and I turned on my fan, and this Italian next to me puts it down, and he starts speaking to me really fast in a dialect. Each area kind of has a dialect, so he spoke in the Roman dialect, in Romanaccio. Or they just kind of abbreviate it, Romanach, which is how they say it in Roman. And he's like, don't do that, you'll get colpa d'aria. And it took him a few tries to explain to me, but he was trying to save my life. And if you have an Italian companion, quite a few of them do that as well. They say, don't turn on the fan, even though it's 110 degrees and 90% humidity and you're sweating, about to die, and you don't know how you're going to get to sleep. They say, don't turn on the fan, we need to close all the windows so we don't get breezes over us. And so we don't want to die. And that's one of the things you had to learn to live with. But as I was explaining to my mom in this email, she wrote me back and she says, well, we have some of that stuff in America too. And I'm like, oh, like what? She said, well, if your feet get wet, you're going to get sick. And I thought, well, that's a good point. Do the viruses seep in through my feet? I mean, what happens? It's just kind of one of those cultural things that, and there were a lot of things like that where I began to say, oh, that's absolutely ridiculous. And I go, oh, but we do this in America. And that's kind of stupid too. The strikes is something that's very important to be aware of. Italians don't strike with demands. They don't strike for a reason. They strike because they want a little mini vacation. They don't strike because they're protesting low wages or not enough time off. Well, maybe enough time off. But they announce their strikes a couple of weeks in advance. You usually have to, they only had, I think, 2 strikes that weren't announced, and those were actually for pay raises or something, but you kind of have to plan around that. If you're in a bus city and there's a strike, you're only going to be able to take a few appointments each week, which usually isn't as much of a problem, but you have to plan, okay, it's going to take us 3 hours to walk from here to here, because we have to walk the whole way. A couple times there were surprise strikes that we missed out hearing about. And it would be like 9 o'clock at night, and we're just heading home. We have to be home by 9:30. Rome's a very late city. Most people don't get home that late, but we had to be home by 11:30 because everyone stayed up bed by 11:30. Usually it's like 9 or 10, but the Italians didn't sleep and they slept in. Or didn't go to sleep early. But anyway, so we'd missed the last bus or the last train. So there were a number of times where we were on the other side of Rome. We found ourselves walking home, and we'd get there at 2 or 3 in the morning. Don't carry documents with you. Carry as few documents as you can. You need your permesso di soggiorno because they'll stop and ask you for that. But do not carry your passport with you. Passports fetch a pretty hefty price on the black market, because if you have a real passport, it's so much easier to do a fake passport. So if you carry your documents with you, they are very possibly will get pickpocketed. Carry as little money as you can in as thin a wallet as you can, and I would usually carry mine right up here, or inside my coat pocket. When I was in Rome, we had people try to break into our apartment twice. If you're in an area and you see that everybody has bars on their windows on the ground floor, and you're on the ground floor, put bars on your windows. I moved in and I noticed that everyone else had bars on their windows, and I'm like, we don't have anything to steal. That doesn't mean they won't break in. That doesn't mean they know you don't have anything to steal until they've broken in. Like, the only thing we had was a CD player that they might be able to pawn for €15. I mean, it was really garbage, but make sure that if you move into an area and there are no bars on your windows, get them. If you're on the ground floor. Usually you won't be. There are tons of beggars. There are beggars everywhere, and it's really hard to say no, and Italian people are very charitable. They give a lot to them, so if they see that you have the name of Jesus Christ on your chest, and that you just walk right by, they're liable to think less of you. So what we used to do, we couldn't afford to, we're broke. People would be shocked when they heard how little we had to spend on food there. They thought there was no way we could feed ourselves on that. It was fine. It wasn't nearly as bad as they thought, but a lot of people just then buy us dinner immediately. Like, I'm going to buy you dinner over there. I'm going to tell them to look for the guys with the name tags. Just go and pick it up when you're done, when you're done for the day and headed home. So we ate really well. But one of my companions started carrying these little plastic baggies, and he just put some food in them. And so whenever we'd walk by a beggar, we'd just chuck him a plastic baggie full of food. And some of them were really upset because they wanted money, because some of them made pretty good living, but some of them really didn't. Some of them really were authentically mentally ill or maybe depressed, I don't know. Some of them you could kind of tell they'd spend it on drugs or booze. So she started talking to us about her husband, and that he was out of work for a little while, and his I don't know what you call it. His daughter's father-in-law comes up and he says, "Hey, I hear you've got some problems." That's the mob boss, the Alessandro clan. And he says, "I hear you got some problems and I want to help you out. I want to give you a job." And he was just delivering grain. Some of the mafia actions are actually legal. Some of their businesses are authentic. And they charge a bit higher, but some of them are just regular business dealings. So they say, "I'm a businessman." Well, that's true to a sense, to an extent. But he started just delivering grain, and then things kind of got out of hand from there. When a mob boss asks you to do him a favor, you're not even usually able to say no. Make him an offer I can't refuse thing. Well, that's any offer that they make is usually an offer that you can't refuse unless you know them really, really well and are on really good terms with them. And so he ended up in the mafia, and he didn't even want to be. He wasn't the boss himself. He was the right-hand man. And he never wanted to be in the mafia, but it's he forced into it. He didn't really have a choice to quit. He didn't have a choice not to, because he was delivering grain, and then it was deliver this one statue which was stolen. Their statue they had actually bought, but this other statue was stolen, and it was worth something like $9,000 or something like that. And then after that, he started driving a bit more getaway type stuff and smuggling hot goods, and everything just kind of went out of control from there. And so he was imprisoned But, some mafia are ruthless killers, and some mafia men are, they've still got a choice. It's still their choice to participate or face the consequences. But it helps a little bit, I think, to be understanding of what some of those consequences can be, and of what the culture is like, the mafia culture in general. Especially with the weight restrictions for luggage. Missionaries can't take a lot of stuff home. They want to send a lot of stuff home, but they leave a lot of stuff that they know they can buy here because it's usually cheaper than trying to ship it. One of those things is long trench coats. The mission president, when they gave me a call to my house, they said, don't bring a long trench coat. We've got them almost every shape, size, color, and style here. And I went and they had about 30. So I picked out one I liked. But departing missionaries tend to leave them. You don't usually need to buy them here. And if you do, the ones there are better suited to the climate anyway. If you need to buy one, buy it there. Same with really big umbrellas. You'll want a big umbrella. Big umbrella. I emphasize that because if you're wearing a long trench coat and it gets soaked at the end because you're stepping outside the range of your umbrella, you're going to have a miserable day. Your shins are going to be chafed, and it's a fairly wet climate. That also means it will be very cold in the winter. It'll only get down to about 35 degrees. That'll be about your average. Maybe a few times it'll dip below freezing. But because it's so humid, that moisture just carries right through your coat. So I recommend getting some long johns before you go. Most of the ones there are not quite as good as the ones here. Get like the kind that are insulated and will wick away sweat. There are some good Drylux long garments that I liked quite a lot. I didn't usually wear the top quite as much as the bottom, but if I wore them both, I usually didn't even need a coat. It was warm enough, unless it was windy or rainy, and then you'll want the coat. But those are some very important things I'd recommend you bring. Some good long johns, not cotton, that wick away sweat. And mesh garments. They don't believe in dryers. Mesh garments dry fast, and they're cool in the summer and don't cling nearly as bad as you'd think they do. Avoid the Corbin. They cling like mad when you get sweaty in the summer. Some people like the Drylux. I found them to be way too warm during the summer. And get dark sheets if you can. You don't have that many darks to wash. Basically your socks. So get darks if you can to wash with everything else, because you have to wait for everything to dry. Get dark sheets. You've got plenty of whites with your shirts and your garments. Just get dark whatever you can. If an Italian seems extremely mad at you, be careful. My brother, when he was on his mission, he wrote home that life is in Italy is like a soap opera. Here was a guy he ran into who his wife ran away with his brother, and then his brother found his wife, this guy's wife, cheating on him, and so he stabbed the guy who was cheating on him with, like, the whole thing was a soap opera. The reason I give this warning is because if they really seem really mad and you're like, man, there's murder in their eyes, usually not, but on some occasions, more often than in America, there might be. They're extremely passionate culture, and because of that, sometimes those passions can get carried away. I saw a number of fights on the street. I don't know if I've ever just been walking down the street in an American city and seen two people just slugging it out, but I saw that several times in Italy. And I saw, so I saw people just giving into that angry urge to hit somebody. So be a little bit careful about that. Well, I was tracting with my trainer, and he was a workhorse. Make sure you appreciate your trainer. A lot of people don't appreciate their trainer. I knew that I came out with the expectation that he was going to be perfect, and he wasn't. But he was darn sure close to it. I just didn't appreciate that quite so much at the time. But we worked really, really amazingly hard. We used to pack a lunch, and we'd stay out all day Saturday. And we put in immense amount of work, and we just practically ran from door to door. He was 6'8", so it was hard for me to keep up with that. And everyone expected I was 14. If he was 19 and 6'8", I must only be 14. But we worked really hard over the course of this 1 3-week span. We had 17 people in our teaching pool, which is pretty sizable for that area. I mean, Italy is, you usually won't have more than a handful. We had 17 people, and 4 of them had baptismal dates set. And in 1 week, our teaching pool dropped down to 3, and we lost all our baptismal invites. All our baptismal commitments. And it was a really hard time, because I loved each and every one of these people. I knew them. And all of a sudden, they didn't want to talk to us anymore. And we worked our tails off trying to find more people. And at one point, my companion just turned around and he says, "We're in the wrong building." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." And so he said, "Okay, you're the greenie, you're the magic worker, you pick where." And I had no idea. So I just kind of closed my eyes and I kind of picked a direction what I thought was nearly at random. And then we walked to a specific door and he's like, "Yeah, this is right." And I was amazed that he was so certain of it. So he said, "All right, now they have this intercom thing, different doorbells for each person. You push it and then the speaker comes on and they ask who you are." And so he's like, "All right, now you pick the button." So I'm like, I don't know. And I pushed one. And the guy said, "Who is it?" And we said, "We're 2 missionaries of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints." And we didn't get any farther. I didn't get to give my whole spiel. He interrupted and he said, "Oh, perfect. I just got up off my knees praying to ask for help. Come on up." And so we went upstairs, and he was this old guy. He was almost 70. He's still actively working construction. Muratore is what they call him. Build walls is what the word means. We sat down, we talked with him, and we noticed all over there was art, which was somewhat less than appropriate. It was made out of collages of things cut out of magazines, and it's about as bad as, I mean, we used to joke that they use pornography for wallpaper in Italy because they don't have censorship for their advertisements or anything. If you walk into a newsstand to buy a bus ticket, you can look at 2 things: the guy's eyes and your feet. So I was used to some pretty shocking stuff, but this was bad, even according to Italian standards. And so we taught him a first discussion, and despite the wall hangings, the Spirit was there. It was there very strongly. We gave him the Book of Mormon. And we came back the next time, and we said, it was like 4 days later, and we said, where are you in the Book of Mormon? And usually we're expecting, I haven't opened it yet, so then we'd open it. Maybe they read the title page, and we opened it, and we're all ready to sit there and read it with him. And he says, I'm in Jacob. And we're like, you made it all the way to Jacob? And he says, no, I finished it, but then I started over, and I'm in Jacob. And we're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. So we came back, and we taught him again and again, and he gave us chocolates the first time, and there was, it's called Mon Cher. Don't eat Mon Cher chocolates because they're a little pocket of whiskey covered in chocolate. So then he said sorry. He realized that he probably shouldn't have given us the ones filled with whiskey. So that time he gave us ones filled with champagne. Just kind of be wary of the chocolates you eat. They like to mix coffee in there too. But we began to talk to him, and in the middle of the discussion we felt like we should talk to him about the law of chastity. Even though that's not covered until later, usually. Well, at the time it was a little bit more specific. We still had the lessons. Preach My Gospel came out a few months afterwards. But so we started talking to him about the law of chastity. And we came back the next time, and his pictures were all still up. And I was like, okay, I'm not sure he quite understood what we were talking about here. So we just very seriously talked to him about it. And we said, look, this means you need to make a lot of sacrifices. He's like, yeah, but... And he instantly knew we were talking about the pictures. We didn't have to tell him that. We didn't have to specify. He's like, I put a lot of time into these. And we're like, well, do you think that there's something better you could put up? Do you think that there's something better you could do? That you could do better than that, maybe? And I thought for sure the answer was no. He was kind of dispirited by the time that we left, because we also covered the word of wisdom and several of the other things. We just kind of followed the Spirit. And it seemed like the Spirit was telling us to tell him every hard thing that he had to do all at once. And usually that means they're going to ask you to go away and not come back, because they don't want to make all the sacrifices at once, just one a week or a couple a week, But we came back, and all the pornography was thrown away. He had some Da Vinci's up. He had some little Caravaggio paintings up. He had a whole bunch of really nice fine art up, and a few new ones that he'd done that were quite nice. And and he offered us I can't even remember what they're called, but he offered us candy with no alcohol in it, and he showed us his cupboards very proudly that he threw away everything, and we said, well, what about your smoking? How are you coming on that? And he's like, I didn't smoke a cigarette since you left last time. Everything just went beautifully. Now, I would love to say that this ends with him getting baptized, but I have no idea how it ends. I'm sharing this story partly because you're going to have really hard experiences. We lost almost everybody that I cared about in that city before we found him. And secondly, because he had to work out of town in Milano for 3 months, and so we transferred him to the missionaries up there, and by the time he came back, I was transferred away. And he moved, apparently, before I was able to write a letter to him. And so I really don't know what happened. And that's the story a lot of times that you find really amazing investigators. But, it's been 8 years since I've come home from my mission. And that still makes it worth it for us to have gone through several months. Just those minutes where you could see him sacrificing everything to get closer to the Lord. And it making such a difference in his life. His face just coming alive as he talks about his favorite parts of the Book of Mormon. You don't have many of those moments, but God always gives you enough. And one time we were just knocking doors, and down this really, really weird little squirrely alleyway where there were doors tucked in every nook and cranny of people who just kind of built an apartment into what was ruins of an old building. And and we went down this one, and it went kind of under this building, and then we went up, and then in a squirrely corner over here, and just all over the place. And we came to this door. It was a metal door about probably 4 feet wide, with a little smaller square door set into it, like a little, in all the movies they go, it was like that. We didn't think about it at the time. It just looked like industrial scrap that someone had picked up and slapped on the front of something. And so we knocked on it. And this girl swings the door open. She's really well dressed. And inside, the floor is paved with marble, which we didn't expect in this part of town. It's got a couple of columns. There's a little fountain in the back. And we kind of, whoa. Well, I guess somebody else thought this building was pretty cool too. And they just put a lot more money into it than I would have expected. And she's like, well, who are you? And from the back, we heard an older voice say, Kie! Which is always the way they ask who's there at the door. You knock on a door, it's always, Kie! So, Kie! And she said, oh, it's just the Jehovah's Witnesses. And we said, oh, we're not Jehovah's Witnesses. And she said, oh, I'm sorry, it's just the Boy Scouts. And we're like, we're not Boy Scouts. Oh, I'm sorry, it's the Evangelists. We're not Evangelists. And she goes, all right, who the heck are you? And, well, she didn't say the word heck, but it's like, all right, fine, who are you? And by this time, the person who was asking was so curious, she came over and she said, come on in. And we sat down and we talked to her. And it didn't occur to us at the moment how odd this whole situation was. But then she had a really amazingly nice house. I mean, these little... she had an authentic ancient Roman statue just in her living room. And we went and went home after that, had lunch, and then went out. Lunch is the big meal of the day. You don't go home and eat dinner. You go home and you have a 2-hour lunch, because if you bother people during lunch, they're ticked. So you have a 2-hour lunch. Your morning studies are usually cut short. This was the tradition while I was there. Maybe they're having you bother people during lunch now, but all the missions were doing this when I was there. And then you go out and you proselyte later in the evening, because they only have a snack for dinner, no big meal to prepare. And we went to our next contact, which was on the other side of the city. And she's like, and people would ask this frequently, well, what part of the city are you working in now? Because everybody knows everybody there. And so they're like, oh, did you meet so-and-so? I know him. Nobody moves. If they do, they move a few streets. This one actually moved like a whole mile to the other side of Castellammare. And so we went and we talked to her, and she's like, where are you working? We're like, oh, we're working down in Scansano. And she's like, I grew up down in Scansano. We're like, really? And she's like, yeah, it's a zona particolare. And we're like, we know. And then she says, but what street are you on? And we're like, well, this morning we did Via California. And she said, oh, that's where I grew up. That was the very street I grew up on. And we're like, no way. She's like, yeah, anybody let you in? We're like, yeah, this one lady. What was her name? Julia Mosca. And she's like, oh. And I'm like, oh, do you know her? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, are you like friends? And she's like, I wouldn't say that, but I know who she is. And we're like, well, what do you mean? And so she pulls out the Mafia page, and she points to a guy who got arrested recently. And she's like, that's your husband. And the next time we went, she admitted to it. Her husband was in prison for mafia dealings. Her son was in prison for mafia dealings, and her son-in-law. Before I left on my mission, one of the most important things for me to understand was the atonement. I wanted to come to understand it better. And then I went on my mission, and I came to a much fuller understanding of it. I know that the atonement of Jesus Christ was real, and that He covers all of everything that we can't. I heard a quote by Jeffrey R. Holland that said, one proof that the church is true is that the fresh-faced young missionaries that we have running around teaching it haven't destroyed it yet. And I think that's true. My sister and I wrote each other while I was on my mission. We wrote about, God could have called a rock to serve a mission. And the rock never would have been tired, would have said exactly what He wanted the rock to say, but He didn't call a rock, He called you. And the point is, we're not enough. But that's okay, because we're not alone. And I have a testimony of the Holy Spirit and its ability to carry a message even when we can't speak the language very well, even when we are never going to fully understand the culture. The Spirit can, and the Spirit can communicate exactly what they need to hear despite what you're actually saying. And I know that through the atonement of Jesus Christ, we can be made worthy to carry this message to other people. When I got to Italy, they said that they were preparing for a temple. They needed a stake in Rome first. That was a directive from the First Presidency. They already bought the ground. And we were always working toward that goal. And every time we said a prayer, we had a little check mark. The only thing that we needed was enough tithing-paying priesthood holders to make a stake. And 3 months before I went home, Elder Nelson came to organize the first stake in my mission. It was just the district of Rome before then. But when I left, it was the stake of Rome. And I cried. And I didn't think I could ever be as touched about good news from my mission. But then I came home, and within 3 years, they announced the Temple of Rome. And at the time, there was a building there that housed missionaries. There was a large house, and it housed about half the missionaries that were serving in Rome. And I got to sleep there one night when I was on splits. It was a really long distance, so the splits were overnight. And so I got to sleep, and I imagined as I was falling asleep where the temple would be. And I'm proud to say there's going to be a temple in my mission next time I go there. Over the time that I was there, I came to love those people that I served. The Spirit has a way of bringing people closer together. And I got to see as the same Spirit that was touching my heart would prick in theirs, and I would see them awaken to a knowledge that God knew them personally, that God loved them, and that He would do anything that He could to make them happy. I got to see them come to understand the atonement of Jesus Christ and the sacrifice that He gave purely out of love for us. That no matter how unworthy we are, that God loves us anyway. I know that this church is the true church of God. That although many other churches have many good things to offer, ours has more than all of them combined. I know that the Book of Mormon truly is the Word of God. I've seen the miracles that it can work in people's lives. I have a firm testimony of the prophetic calling of the apostles and the prophet in the First Presidency, and that where they call you to go is where you need to be. And these things I say in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.